with you today and to share some stories about water, tell you about what it is to what it's like to be here at Smithsonian Gardens and what it's like to be a horticulturist. And so I especially love to share information about becoming a horticulturist. When I was a kid, I really was trying to decide what I was going to be when I grew up. And I kept on going back and forth because I love science, but I also really love horticulture or art. And so I was trying to figure out how I could put the two of them together. And this is Graham, who is our IPM specialist, Integrated Pest Manager specialist, working with a group of our interns that we get every year from colleges all across the United States. Maybe somebody would like to be an intern next year to work with us because it's a great opportunity. And I'm showing this picture because I never knew how I was going to work together, science and art, until I discovered horticulture. And horticulture really is the perfect combination between science and art because you need to know the science so that you can work with the plants and you can work with the soils and you understand all the processes that go along with the plants, but you also need to have the side of art because art is important when you're putting all these plants together. This is a terrific picture outside of our American Indian Museum, and it is really showing the art of it, the sculptures that would go into the gardens, and the combination of the plants. So it really takes your breath away as you're walking through some of the gardens here at the Smithsonian. I thought I'd share with you too what a horticulturist was because it may be a name that you're not familiar with, and it comes from the Latin just meaning garden cultivation. And in horticulture, there's so many different jobs that you could do a different job every year in your life and still just have the same degree that you started out with. And so I started out with working with plants, which is the olericulture, but now I do more garden writing and horticulture education than anything else. But I think you should really look into going into horticulture because it is such a great field in science that you can learn different things. This is us here at Smithsonian Gardens, and this is the iconic picture outside of the castle. And this is the Hopt Garden, which was named after Enid A. Hopt. And this is a stupendous garden for people to come and visit at this time of the year. The weather has been rather interesting this year, and so you wouldn't see this right now. You would have when we were planting this talk, but right now all the blossoms are off of the magnolia trees and the cherry trees because we've had such warm weather lately. But while we're looking at these pictures, I want you to think about the science of how water is in each of these pictures and how it would work, how water would work with horticulture, because that's our topic today. And I thought I would take you on a whirlwind tour of what I've been up to lately. Because when I was talking to Ashley and Adam, they said, "Oh, share with them what a horticulturist does." Because the name is great, but what do you actually do if you get into horticulture? So you could be a gardener here working in the Hopt Garden, or you could have gone along with me this past month to see some of the different experiences that I had. And one of my favorites was going up to the Philadelphia Flower Show this year, and their theme was Hawaii. And Hawaii so fit into this talk with water because it's totally surrounded by water. Think about Hawaii, and the series of islands that were made by volcanoes and just surrounded by the water. And this, when you walked into the flower show, was their main exhibit. And it was supposed to represent the waves that washed on the Hawaiian shores. So this was, I thought, was a great representation as water as art. And it got you into the mood. You could hear the waves crashing over you as you're walking underneath that one exhibit. Here's another exhibit that they had to show how water could fit into your garden. And those are beautiful teak logs. So as we're looking at these pictures, again, I'm reminding you to make a list of what you see in the picture and how it relates to water, science, art, whatever you can think of to go along with it. But this is an exhibit that they had from Temple University, which is a wonderful university out here on the East Coast that looks at landscape design and horticulture. And you can get a degree at Temple University. But they wanted to share with the people that were visiting the flower show how Hawaiians thought about water and how they combined it with gardening. So this was a great panel where they were having you look at maybe learning how to extend your garden so that you could grow some of your food at home. Because think about it, if you're in Hawaii, if you're not growing it on the island, you're shipping it in from everywhere across the world. And it has to come across the water, but it sure would be great if you would have that ability to grow it right in your backyard. And this is a plant you may be familiar with in the garden. This is Taro, or Alocasia. Elephant ears is another common name for it, and you can see where it would get its common name as elephant ears because it really does look like an elephant ear as it blows around in the wind. But taro is a plant that the Hawaiians eat, and many Polynesians and Malaysians do eat because it's a starch that really is an addition to their diet. So to grow that in their own backyards was really important for the Hawaiians and many other people. You can see this picture also has a terrific water fountain in it. It just bubbles up and out of this concrete tube that the students made themselves.
Cindy, can I ask about that?
Sure.
The taro is used as a large ornamental plant in many landscape designs that I
That's
see around
correct.
where I live. Can you eat that variety?
You can eat that variety. There's one, Alocasia and Colocasia. They're both taro plants, and they're both edible. One is from one part of the world, the other's from another part of the world, but they both have this edible root. And if you ever see a plant, Colocasia, I'm bringing to you because its full Latin name is Colocasia Esculenta, and Esculenta means edible in Latin. So if you ever see that behind a plant, you know that that's an edible plant, and it's okay. It's not going to make you sick.
So it's the root that people eat.
It's the root that people eat. It's you definitely have to acquire a taste for it. Not one that I have acquired yet. So the taro is used as an ornamental, but it is also edible. I love this panel because it talked about how the soil that they have in Hawaii are really good to filter the water, or how you work with the gardens to be able to, the construction of the gardens to be able to filter the water or trap the water. And this picture that they had, or this exhibit that they had, really shows how the garden and how the soils below and the rocks below filter the water. And you can construct something like this in your own garden so you know the water that's going to come from the rain or wherever is going to help filter the water. So those were two things that were in the Philadelphia Flower Show that I thought totally related to this topic. And then I went down to New Orleans, and I know you can't believe that that's part of a horticulturist's job, but we work with the Garden Club of America, and they have meetings all over the United States, and they pick different places so we can see all these different gardens. And this year they picked New Orleans. How does this relate to water? Well, if you can remember, a couple years ago there was the terrible flooding with Katrina, and it all was based on this river that you're seeing right behind the houses. This is the Mississippi, and this is the French Quarter that I'm standing up on the roof taking a picture of. And this is really odd. Most places the river is below the buildings, but in this case the river is actually higher than the downtown. So once the levees broke, all the water then went rushing through New Orleans, and that's what one of the problems was during Katrina, because there was too much water. So we got a great look of that, and now the areas that were totally wiped out by the flood are being rebuilt. And this is something that this is a type of house that they're using so that the water is not going to affect them as much as what it did before. You can see in this picture, I have to wait for my little dot to appear, is the house is actually up on stilts. So as the water comes in, if it does come in again, The lower level is the water will be able to rush through it. That's where the parking lot is. That's where the garage is. So the cars are going to be down below there. But the living level up here is above where the water is going to be. And what was really interesting was all the air conditioning units and all the heating units were up on top of the roof, so that as the water came in, the people wouldn't be out of power again, which I thought was incredibly smart. This was actually done by Brad Pitt, which he does live in the area. So I a name dropper, I'm sorry. I just thought it was interesting that Brad Pitt. This was such a cool plant I saw in New Orleans. This is the resurrection fern. And the resurrection fern has adapted to the differences in water that's available through the climate down there. When it rains, it's beautiful and green like it is in this picture. When it doesn't rain, the plant just goes into a dormant mode and it turns brown and it looks like it's dead. But as soon as it starts raining again, it
And it
pops
grows
right back
on
up.
trees?
And
it grows on the
grows
bark?
right on the bark. It grows right on the tree. It doesn't have to be in the soil. It will grow on the side of buildings too if there's enough a surface for it to attach itself to. So resurrection fern is a cool plant adaptation to the amount of water that's in the environment. And so it's a children's garden at Longview. Longview is a public garden down in New Orleans that really got wiped out during the hurricane, but they're rebuilding like crazy. So this is the art that they have in the garden. This is a rill that they have in one of their gardens, and a rill spelled IRLL, in case you want to look it up, was a Persian adaptation of irrigating their crops. In Persia, they would have these rills that off of the garden. Here's the rill, this long piece that's right here. So that was the irrigation that they would then have little side rills that would go to the different garden beds. So as the water would flood the rill, then the plants would be irrigated. But now it's a decorative ornament in a garden, at least for most gardens. Water is so cooling as it evaporates. It just makes you feel so much better. So many gardens have fountains and ways to cool off, not just visually, but also in this case, literally, because the water evaporates and this courtyard is so warm with the brick. It just absorbs the heat in the daytime and then casts it off in the evening. So the water as you're walking through is cooling down this courtyard. So you would feel really, it would be good to walk into instead of just like an oven to walk into like the brick would be. And by the end of the day, we were all so glad that most of the gardens that we visited had water, because our feet were just about had it. So we were very appreciative for the water in this garden. Now I want to jump back into the gardens, and if you visited us today, this is what you would see in the gardens. This is in the Moongate Garden, which is outside the Sackler. The Smithsonian Gardens has gardens outside of each one of the museums that really enhances the visitor's experience. The Sackler Museum is an art museum that concentrates on Asian art. So the Moongate is a type of a garden feature in Asian gardens. So this is a moongate laid down on its side, and it forms this beautiful bridge that goes around the pond that's in the Sackler Museum. So come and visit us, and this is one of the gardens that you would see. This is inside the Freer Museum, and the Freer is another museum that the artwork is really focused on Asian art as well as some other types of art. The Freer is named after a terrific gentleman that was a great collector of art, so it's put into this museum, but we enhance the visitor's experience with this fountain and this pearl or necklace of boxwood that's around the fountain.
How often do those boxwoods need to be shaped?
Oh, good question. That's Rick's job, and he goes out there about once every other week to trim off the little sprouts that come up and off of those pearls that are in the necklace. Right. And he just actually had to replace all the boxwood because they started to grow out too much, and it was impossible to keep it in place. So the water keeps the boxwood in good shape, and it also really draws the people's eyes out to this courtyard and helps them remove themselves from the museum
That
and
is
go out
so
and
lovely.
enjoy. This is outside the African Art Museum, and this is the Chardier, which is a fountain garden, and the water splashes up, and I just enjoy watching the children in the summertime splashing around in this garden to keep cool. Outside the American Indian Museum, there are the different environments that are supposed to evoke the spirits of the direction that you're looking. So this is looking east, and this swampland, this marshland, is recreating what Washington, D.C. used to be like before we moved in with all of our politicians and all of our Starbucks. And now this is the marshland that really enhances the building, and it gives a nod to the types of plants that you would find in the Washington, D.C. area before it got so cultivated. And it really makes people think what could be now. If you went into a native plant area in Virginia or in Maryland, this is what you would find. And the water really soothes the soul of the people that are coming out of the museums. And the water soothes the soul of many different visitors as you come into Washington, D.C. So I hope you come and visit us sometime so you can see some of these fountains and some of the water that really makes a difference in our gardens.
It's funny, I love that photo.
Don't you?
They do have to drink.
They do have to drink, and this is great. I wouldn't drink the water myself if I was coming into Washington in this pond, because those horses probably have slobbered quite a bit in that pond, and I wouldn't want to drink along. But this is one way that we're concerned about water in horticulture and at Smithsonian Gardens. But another way that we have to think about water is, how do our plants take this water up? What good does the water do to the plants? And we want to make sure that our plants are really healthy and they get the amount of water that they need. So our beds in the gardens, and a bed is just that soil area. It's just a place where we're putting the plants in, we're tucking them in, so it's a garden bed. But we have to add irrigation to all of these gardens because we need to regulate the amount of water that goes in to supply the plants with water. And so we do water an awful lot of the plants just with hoses, just like you do at home. And this is outside the Air and Space Museum. And the horticulturists spend a lot of their time watering and watering and watering. It's a major job. In fact, those are all interns. They seem to get the watering job a lot in the summertime. So a horticulturist has to be concerned with the amount of water a plant needs. And we also have to be concerned with how much water the plant needs. How much is too much? How much is too little? So that's something else that we're going to look at in this conversation. These are great plants. These are aeoniums that are in a big planter box in California when I was out visiting last year. These are the size of dinner plates.
Oh my goodness!
So they're just outstanding. It's a house plant that I have, but not nearly this big. Out there, they lived year long outside.
Is this what my grandmother knew as chicks and hens?
This is related to the chicks and hens. This is not the exact same thing, but there are very many succulent plants around the world,
Yeah,
and
hers
it
were
just
much
depends on the
smaller.
regions. So I want you to be concerned as we're looking at some of these plants with the adaptations that the leaves have made. And we'll talk more about this, but you can look at this plant and think, oh my goodness, what's it doing with all the water that's inside of it? A horticulturist also has to be concerned about how we're going to put all these plants together to make a pleasing combination. And they better require the same amounts of water, because if one plant like this red hot poker plant, this Nephophia that's in the garden right down here, this is a red hot poker plant, and Nephophia is its Latin name, and it better take the same amount of water as this allium that has its seeds all over it right now, because if they didn't, one plant would look great, but the other plant would look terrible. So it definitely wouldn't be a pleasing combination. So that's a job for horticulturists to figure out what amount of water would they take. But water in a plant has a whole different reason for being. And this is a cabbage plant, which you may recognize on your plate for dinner in coleslaw or something like that. And parsley is in here too. Parsley, oops, I'm sorry, pushed the wrong arrow. Parsley is this one over here, which you might recognize as a garnish. You may not recognize this plant. This is a nasturtium, a great plant to put in pepper salad, because it's as spiky and as spicy as a pepper plant is. But water's main job is to really help form a leaf in a plant. A plant really wants to get up and growing and send that leaf out so it can absorb the sunlight, absorb water, and really get the plant growing. And we'll talk more about the process of why that leaf is so important in a bit. So there are so many different leaves that are out there. Look at this one with the split leaf philodendron, or this one with the banana plant that is so nice and broad. So there are leaves of all different shapes and sizes and colors. This is an asparagus fern in an urn in the Ripley garden. So leaves come in all shapes and sizes. This is an illustration that shows the different parts of a leaf, because if you're going to talk about a leaf, you really should know what a leaf is. So the major part of the leaf is the blade, or the whole big flat part of the leaf. The petiole is what some people would call the stem of the leaf, but the stem is really this. This is where the leaf is attached. So the entire leaf is the blade and the petiole put together. The midrib is just going up through, and that's how we actually identify some plants, is by the arrangement of the veins in the leaves on the plant. We also see how the leaves are arranged on the stem. Some are opposite, some are alternate, and that's a good way to identify a plant. So that's a leaf, and when you're talking about a leaf, think about all these different parts. But I thought this was fun, because the top layer of the cells on a leaf are the epidermal cells, and this is really like a leaf's
Just like our body.
skin, just like our body, epidermis. And you can do this at home or in your school. Take a big leaf, something that's really easy to work with. A banana leaf would be great. Or something, a taro leaf would work well too. Stick it in a refrigerator for a couple of hours, and then see if you can really gently pull the top layer off of the plant, almost like saran wrap or plastic wrap. It works. It'll separate from the bottom part of it. So you can pull this top layer off, and when you do that, you can see with the naked eye the different cells that go in that top layer of the leaf. And I helped you out a little bit with this magnification of the epidermal layer of the leaf. But you can see in this how all the cells fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. Isn't that cool? And you can see the nucleus or the nuclei in each one of these cells. And then you'll notice these cells that look kind of weird. They look like two bananas put together to me with a little space in between. Those, the outside parts that look like a banana are the guard cells, and then the inside is the stoma or the stomate. That's how water and air gets in and outside of a plant. Remember that, because it's really important as we start to look at these different processes and how water works in a leaf. This, if you could take a leaf and you could cut it, a section of it, this is what you would see. So you would see the epidermis on the top part and on the bottom part of the leaf, and then you would also see the mesophyll. That's what the middle part of the leaf is called. And you could see those little stoma or stomates that are on the epidermis, but then you can see inside the leaf, and you can tell it's not just straight packed cells like it was in the epidermis. It's not a puzzle. You have spaces in between that you have air into it, because a plant just doesn't have the cells with the water, it also has the air inside of it. That's really important.
Which is why they're light enough to hang off of the branches and the stems.
Part of it, but a plant needs air just like we need air. So this is where it's holding the air. So the water inside of each one of those cells would look kind of like this. They're in these water vacuoles, which is right here in the middle of the cell. And so then you have the protoplasm, the cytoplasm. The protoplasm is actually this whole part that is surrounded by the wall, the cell wall. And then the cytoplasm, I always think of it like Jell-O, because it's not quite water and it's not quite solid, but it's that Jell-O material in between. And it holds all these different minerals and all these, the chloroplasts, which are very important in the plant, greening. With the photosynthesis, you need that green, and that's what's in it, the chloroplasts, or the green part that you see on the outside of a leaf, and of course the nucleus that's in the middle. This, though, when I started to think about water vacuoles and how it makes a difference in a cell, I started to think about balloons. And you could really think of a water vacuole being filled up like a balloon, like a water balloon, and then the outside of the cell, the protoplasm, would be like the bucket that these balloons are in. And as the balloons are filled with water, it gives it turgidity. It gives it its turgor pressure is what it's called. And as long as those balloons are inflated, then the cell wall is going to be nice and tight, and it's going to be plump, really, and the plant is going to be in good shape. But then when you take the water out of the balloon, what happens? It's now deflated. So there's no more water in the balloon. And I couldn't find a picture with a collapsed bucket, but I could find a picture with a collapsed plastic bag. So you can think about it. That's like the cell when there's no turgidity, when there's no turgor pressure inside of each one of those cells, the water vacuoles, to keep that cell in good shape. So what would happen to the plant if there's no water in the water vacuoles?
I know.
Yeah. Do you know? What happens? What happens?
I think it would wilt.
You're right. It's gonna wilt because it needs the water in the cells in the vacuoles to be able to hold it together. So water is really important for a plant. Let's go back to that picture with the cross section of what a leaf would look like inside. And remember those air spaces that are in there. Those air spaces are really important. If the water is inside all these things that look like stalagmites and stalactites, which are the palisade cells, it doesn't really stay inside that cell. That cell water cannot contain that, or that cell wall cannot contain the water. So it goes out, it evaporates out inside of this whole series of cells into these air spaces. So that water is now evaporating and turning into a gas. And that gas now can escape through the stoma, and that's what transpiration is all about. So let's go back or go forward and look at transpiration. And this is how water works in a plant too. So this is water gas evaporating or transpiring outside of a leaf. And this process is really important to a plant and to how a plant will work and how the water moves up through the plant, and we'll look at that too. This water droplet that's outside of here is also seen on a leaf, but that doesn't have anything to do with transpiration. That's called guttation. That's the greedy little plant taking up so much water through the roots that it doesn't have any place to stay in the plant, so it actually gets kicked out. It'd be like you eating too much and all of a sudden you can't hold anymore, so
Uh-oh.
it gets kicked out of your body. So it's getting kicked out of the leaf. And if you get up early enough in the morning, you're going to see those water droplets on the end of many leaves if you're in an area where it's really moist. So those are two different ways that water is going to come out of a plant. But let's look at the stoma really closely underneath the leaf so you can see how it's going to let the water out. Here's the guard cells and the chloroplasts, which are the green parts of the cell, though in this case they dyed the cells red so you could see it better underneath a magnifying glass or a microscope. But the water is going to come out of those stomas in the process of transpiration. If you don't believe me, this is a really neat experiment to do in your classroom or at home. Take a plastic bag, and you can do this inside or outside, but put the plastic bag over a branch. And a couple hours later, or even the next day, go back and look to see how much water is trapped on the inside of that bag. That's how much water has transpired from that plant in however many hours that we're working on it. So transpiration is really the loss of water from living leaves by evaporation. The stomates, or the stoma that's on the bottom of the leaf, really only account for about 1% of the volume of the leaf, but 90% of the water transpiration comes out of those stomas for a leaf. So let's look at what would happen. This transpiration process is so important. Every plant does it, but it does it to different levels. A corn plant, which you see in this picture, is going to transpire about a gallon of water on a hot summer's day.
Wow.
That's a pretty amount of
No
water.
wonder the Midwest is so humid.
Yeah, it's so humid. And the fact that you understand that you have to supply the water to that corn plant. So you have to keep it, especially when there's no rainfall. So you have to keep watering it. But on the other hand, a cactus plant only transpires about a quarter of a fraction of a quart a day, because it really comes from an area that there's not that much water that's going on. So look at the corn plant and how it has its leaves that are on it, and look at the cactus plant. Where are its leaves? They're hidden. And we'll look at one a little bit closer so you can see where the leaf is in the cactus plant. But I thought I'd also share with you a tree will evaporate, it depends on the tree, but about 15 gallons of water a day. And some of you schools have been working with another shout presenter. His name is Josh, and he's from Cirque, which is not too far from me. It's down on the down by Annapolis in Maryland. And Josh is participating in this tree banding project. And he is having groups, and you can sign up for this on the Smithsonian Institution's website, to be a tree bander, and he will send you a kit with these tree bands in it, and you can put the tree band around the trunk of the tree, and you measure the growth of the tree. Well, Josh and I were talking the other day, and he said, Cindy, you won't believe it. You put a tree band on a tree in the morning, and it's actually going to be bigger. That trunk is going to be bigger in circumference in the morning than it is in the day.
Because of the water that
it transpires during the day. Transpiration shuts down at night. A plant does not usually transpire at night. It usually only transpires in the daytime. So it shuts down at night, so it's accumulating all the water in the morning, and it's getting all nice and juicy. But by the end of the day, all that water is passed down through it, or passed up through it, and so the tree is skinnier. I wonder if that works on us,
We
too.
got a question about the difference between deciduous and conifers in terms of their output.
Ah, that's a good one. Deciduous plant is going to transpire while it's growing, while it has leaves on it. An evergreen plant is going to transpire all the time because it always has leaves on it. So here on the, and I'm a mid-Atlantic gardener, so I know most about mid-Atlantic gardening and horticulture. So in our mid-Atlantic winters, most of the times they can be really cold, but an evergreen plant is always transpiring. So I have to be concerned that it's not going to transpire so much when the ground is frozen that it can't get water to go up through it. And so that does affect a lot of plants. So I might have to go out and water some of my new plants in the middle of the winter, as long as the ground's not frozen, so that it has water so it doesn't die.
And
so,
if it transpires when the air temperature is freezing or below, it still can release the water.
It still can release the water. Okay. But plants have adaptations. Leaves have adaptations to be able to work with it. And I actually put that in, so that's a good question to go along with it. But transpiration works, and I know many of you students are very familiar with this chart. This is the water cycle, and this is very important to us as humans, because do you know that all the water that we have right now, we've always had and we always will have? We haven't made any new water, and we'll never be able to make any new water, so we better take care of the water that we have. And the water cycle is showing how the water moves throughout our earth. So we always say, well, it's always raining, so we must be getting new water. But we're really not getting new water. The water is going up through the plants, and it's transpiring through the plants because just of its normal process, and it eventually will go up into the clouds, and when enough of the water aggregates together, then it's going to rain or snow or do its thing, and it's going to go down through the ground, and it's going to filter through the ground, or the water's going to go into a lake or into a river, and then the process is going to happen all over again. Some of the water evaporates up through the river or lakes or the sea, or of course through the plants. So that water cycle is really important. When the rain hits, a horticulturist should consider what happens to that rain. It's going to make a difference in the surfaces that we create, or that you create, or that are naturally there, to what happens to that water. So I want you to think about which of these surfaces are going to absorb most of the water. This is my backyard, so I'm very familiar with it. If you want to see how it works in your own yard or around your school, go out in the middle of the rain and watch to see what happens to the water. When those droplets fall, which of those surfaces are going to absorb most of the water, and why should you be concerned with that? Well, look, they're actually starting to answer. They're starting to think, and the garden bed is winning so far. The lawns are right up there. Nobody has voted for the flagstone or the patio or the brick walkway, which is actually really very good of you, because a flagstone is really not going to absorb any of the water. Now, what I've done with my patio, and what we can consider as gardeners and horticulturists, is to lay that flagstone or those bricks on a permeable surface. So the water might bounce off of the flagstone, but it's actually going to be absorbed by the surface below, which is an aggregate. I used bluestone dust, but you could use sand or something like that.
Right, my bricks are on sand.
On sand, because the water then, even though it's going to bounce off the brick, it eventually will go down through. If that was asphalt, is that going to absorb any of the water at all? No. And people actually, I'm glad to see you guys haven't been tricked, because a lot of people say, well, there's grass everywhere. It's going to absorb plenty of water.
Well, I was going to say that I have plants that grow up in the sand.
Yeah, and plants grow up in the sand. That's right, because they're getting plenty of water as it filters down through that sand. But the turf is not going to absorb as much as the garden bed, because the turf actually can be very compacted. If you came out and you walked along our grand mall, the mall space that's in between all of our museums, with all that stepping on, the soil really gets compacted. So turf is not that good of an water absorber. So I'm so glad I couldn't trick you with that picture. But in these pictures, we're going to look at the special adaptations the leaves have made so that when the water goes up through the plant, they don't lose all of the water because it would not necessarily be good for the plant to lose as much water in some areas as it would in other areas. I can see somebody's here from Colorado that is watching the Shout presentation. And Colorado in some of the areas are really dry, so a plant in Colorado is really going to have to store up some of its water, and it's not going to want to transpire as much as, say, a plant here on the East Coast would. So let's look at some of these plants and see the adaptations that the leaf has made so that all the water is not going to flow out of it as quickly. In this rose plant, a rose is from, they're different species, but this rose in particular is from Persia. And in Persia, it's a little bit drier. So the top part of the leaf is actually shiny. It looks like it has wax on the top of it. And you can even tell this is when we're irrigating it, so the water is bouncing off of it. That's not from the leaf inside of it. That's not evaporation or transpiration. That's us watering. But the leaf is kind of shiny, so the water is actually bouncing off of it in this plant. It has a cutin or wax on top of the surface to be able to help prevent the water from evaporating. In this case, this is a passion flower with that big bumblebee, so happy to have the flower and the nectar available. But the stomates are only on the underside of the leaf, not on the top of the leaf, so the water is only evaporating on the underside or transpiring on the underside. This is important because some leaves actually get so much water that there are stomas on the top and the bottom of the leaf. But the passion flower only has the water or the stomates on the bottom. Okay, so in this plant, this is a rhododendron, which is the evergreen plant. And its leaves actually curl. So when the water transpires, it's going to hold on to the water in the wintertime when it's not getting a lot of water available to it.
So the leaves curl when the
leaves,
water is not available.
That's
correct. But they open up when it is.
They open up when it is. This is an evergreen, and this is a conifer in the hopped garden. And they have special stomas on it so that it's not going to transpire all the time. They'll actually shut down at night and shut down in different parts of the day so that it doesn't lose as much water. These are lamb's ears, and the special hairs on the lamb's ears, just like that was on the cactus that we saw in the previous plant, is actually going to trap water. And again, this water is from us watering in the morning. But the air that's circulating around the leaf is not going to be able to get to the blade of the leaf to increase evaporation. The hair is going to trap the water and going to protect the air from going across. So that's another adaptation that the leaf has had. This is an aloe plant, and it's really waxy to be able to hold the water that's on the inside of it. This is another aloe, and its leaf is actually filled with bitter enzymes, bitter alkaloids that are in it, and that actually chemically attaches the water inside of the leaf. So that's a really neat adaptation. Here's the cactus, and remember I told you where the leaves, or asked you where the leaves on the cactus? Hey, you don't see them because the whole stem is the leaf. There's so little water where this plant is growing that it can't afford to make leaves. So the whole stem is the leaf, and it serves to be able to do the photosynthesis that's inside the stem. Those little things that you see on it, the spines, are actually there for protection and actually there to help prevent the water from, again, evaporating as
Similar
quickly.
to the little hairs
Similar
that
to
were
the
on.
little hairs, exactly. This is a fern, and it has a big, broad leaf. It has lots of stomates, and lots of water can evaporate from it. So each one of these leaves have adapted to the amount of water that's available for transpiration. And you know what? I thought, if you were a leaf and you were in the environment that you were, what kind of leaf would you be, and what kind of adaptations would you have? So that's something that you guys could think about. What kind of leaf would you be in the environment that you're growing in, and what special adaptations would you have on your leaf?
And you can answer that question in the chat window if you'd like to tell Cindy
great, because I love to know what kind of leaves that you would be. But now transpiration is part of the reason that a plant takes up water, and that's part of the reason that the water is in a plant. The turgidity is another reason that's in it. But I would like you to think about what other roles the water has in a plant. And one of the major things is for the water to be able to transport the minerals that are in the soil. And so the water is actually absorbed through the roots, and the minerals come in with that, and the water then moves up through the xylem, these water vessels that are in the stem, to be able to have the minerals go throughout the entire plant. So this is how the plant actually gets the minerals that are in the soil. It's like a big straw, and if you cut a sunflower in half, if you cut across the stem of it, you could actually see these straws that are inside of the plant. That actually takes the water up through the plant and actually moves the minerals from the roots up into the flowers and all the rest of the plant. Do that.
We've got some interesting responses.
Okay.
Our group from Las Vegas says they would be an aloe leaf. And from Lake Bluff, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago, they would be a big broad leaf like a maple.
Oh, that's great.
They're
because
certainly
Illinois must get a
thinking
lot
indigenous.
more water than I'm glad to see all of you are native plants instead of just plants that have been brought in. So that's wonderful. You're thinking very wisely for the water that you're going to be able to handle. So this is going back to the picture before, where you're seeing all these different vacuoles that the water goes up through, and they really do look like straws. These cells used to be alive, and they have since died, and now the water's going up through just like a straw. And this is actually lignin. So you can see on the outside of this cell wall, that's lignin, and that's wood. And that's what is the difference between, now these are two big words, but between a plant that is wood, dicot, compared to a plant that doesn't have any real wood, which is a monocot. And go look those up and see what a dicot and a monocot are.
I think in the fall, when I cut down my flower garden, this is going to be interesting to see what's inside. Some of like a daylily sends up a spike that then gets sort of woody
It does,
when it
because
dries.
all plants have a certain amount of wood in it. If it didn't, it wouldn't be able to stand upright. It'd be kind of like that Jello all over again. So the water turgidity helps, and this is part of the water turgidity, is the water actually going up through those straws, and the wood keeps it in place, which plants are fascinating to me. But to really understand how a water absorbs the minerals, you have to look at your soils. And we're not going to talk a lot about them, but I really want you to look at the difference between this type of soil, which is really granular, and how rapid the water goes through it. And that would be a sandy soil. And I'm way more familiar in our area with these types of soils, which is a clay soil. And you can see the water really has a really tough time getting down through. And as a horticulturist, I have to know the difference between my soils, because that's going to make a difference on what type of plant I can put in. So I'm always looking to see, what are my soils? What am I working with? And here it shows when you're doing a sandy soil, whoops, I clicked on that one twice. When you're doing a sandy soil, there isn't a lot of pore space that's there, a lot of pores that are there, but the space that's available is great. So that the water, when you're putting it through, can go down through, and it just kind of splashes down through really easily. But in a clay soil, there's lots of different pores, but the pore space is really poor, pardon the pun, but it's really bad, because the plates of the clay are really tight together, and it really doesn't allow the water to move around very easily. So when I'm looking at the soils, this would be a great soil for me to put asparagus in or strawberries in, because in the spring you're getting a lot of water, so that I can, and those are both spring plants. But this clay soil is going to be better for something that really can tolerate less air and less water that's in it, like a Acergricium, which is a paper bark maple, and it actually is adapted to that type of condition. So I'm going to understand the differences between my soils. Compost is the magic ingredient as a gardener, as what I'm going to try to amend each of those type of soils too, because we already said that the water goes through the sandy gardens really quickly, so compost is going to act like a sponge. It's going to hold the water and it's going to hold the nutrients so that I don't have to water or fertilize quite as often, especially for my edible plants. The compost is going to act as a sponge again in the clay soils because it's going to help break apart those clay plates, and it's going to allow more pore space to be there so that the water is going to be able to move more freely through the clay gardens.
If you need to add compost, do you do that every year?
I do that every year because compost is organic material, and it's going to break down very quickly because of the conditions that is in the soil. So I do that every year.
Which makes me think of basic gardening tasks.
Right.
How much time do you spend at the Smithsonian on watering and, like in the week during the summer? How much time would you say?
Every day. It just depends on which garden that you're in, but if you were in that hopped garden with the amount of containers that we have in there, you would be spending 4 hours a day watering.
Wow.
If you were in the American Indian garden that I showed you, that's right up along the water, you don't have to spend that much time watering because the water's already there, the soil's already absorbing the water that is in there, and so it's readily available. So it just depends on the garden.
When you're watering, where's your water come from?
Here at the Smithsonian, from spigots, from that irrigation system that I showed you that's set up. Some of them are pop-up waters, and so they're just on a timer, and that we actually have a sensor to determine if it's raining or not, because there's nothing worse than on a timer if if the timer says it's time to water but it's raining, we don't want to waste the water, so we're going to make sure that the irrigation system is shut off at that time. So we are very considerate about the water that we use, and we want to make sure we're doing what's best for the plant. Great. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah,
that we really should, because we could talk about water all day long, but I
Water
know you're asking me questions, so what is everybody else asking me?
Right. So audience, think about the questions you want to ask Cindy, and please put it in the Q&A, and we'll take some time to do that as we wrap up. The timing for this is perfect because in North America anyway, we're coming into spring and we're thinking about gardening and planting. On my walk here this morning, I saw them putting out petunias, pansies at this time.
Pansies, yeah. Pansies are a pretty good crop for us. We have them all year long, so we can have them in the winter time, and they do okay. This winter they did beautifully. In the spring they're doing great. Our pansies though don't like our summer temperatures. So
too hot?
Yeah, too hot. So you see them out there choking, and we can't water them enough to be able to keep them alive. And water is going up through these root hairs, which is something that a plant really needs. This big root that's in the middle, this big radical root, doesn't really absorb a lot of water. All the water is being absorbed by these little root hairs.
That's a beautiful little image.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important when you're transplanting a plant that you're buying from the nursery to really pay attention to the roots that are there. You don't want to disturb those root hairs. You want as much intact as possible. In fact, if you've ever seen anybody pick up a tree and break off all its little roots that are around the outside of it, that tree is just not going to survive because it doesn't have any root hairs at all. So we're still waiting. This is how the osmosis, this is how the transpiration process happens. And this is why it's so important to have both the water in it and the air in it, because those stomates that are on the bottom of the leaf actually allow the water to go out and the air to come in.
Well, I'm sorry. Speaking
that's okay.
of that perfect balance of water and air, the class from Colorado is concerned that they didn't get as much snow this year. So what will be the impact on plants?
Because you didn't get a lot of snow this year, you're not going to have a lot of water in your rivers. And irrigation is going to be really important. The amount of water that we're taking out of our rivers to be able to supply our farms, our yards, our golf courses, to be able to keep them green like we like them to be, or the food that's available to us, it's going to be a big concern this year for the areas that didn't get the water. If we get a lot of rain in the summer and the spring out in Colorado, that problem is going to be alleviated a little bit. But otherwise, I would start thinking about putting in as many native plants as possible. Think about not watering your turf areas so that it can be available for the farmers so that they can use it in to water their crops. And maybe all of our golf courses should think about using more native plants so that they don't have to water as much. And think of a different way to have a golf course constructed. I don't know what's going to be a good substitute for turf for the golf ball to go around, but it's a big problem, and it's something that all of us should be concerned with, because there's not enough water to go around, unfortunately. So we have to be kind to our neighbors.
I have a friend whose husband is a golf course architect, and he and I have had plenty of conversations about that, how he selects the plant materials based on where he's designing, because he's sent all over the world to do that.
It's a big thing to think about. We want to be happy. We want our stuff to survive, but we also want to be kind to people in areas that don't have as much water. So I'll be thinking about you guys in Colorado and watching the weather station, and hope you get some relief here soon. This is why plants are so important, and why photosynthesis is so important, because we cannot take the energy from the sun like a plant can and produce the proteins and the other parts of the plant that we're consuming. We have to rely on plants to do all of that for us so that we can consume the plants and the animals can consume the plants. And that's why water is important to all of us. If we don't have it for the plants, we're not going to have the energy that we need. And you can always get too much water. So you do that. So we're gone.
Well, too much water is a great segue, though, Cindy, for what we're going to talk about next is the forest a sponge? So can it simply hope to absorb everything that comes down? And at the top of our hour, we're going to start again in Panama. We're going back down to the Stry area and examining this next question, and my colleague Jonathan will take over from there. But I want to thank you for spending this time and getting me revved up for the garden season, at least.
Great. Well, thank you so much, and please come and visit us at Smithsonian Gardens. We'd love to see you.